restarting now, so I'll start again now. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us for this webinar called Engineering Graduates for Industry, Rethinking Our Approach to Skills Gaps, Contextualisation and Partnerships. My name is Jack Tretui. I am the Outreach Officer for the IMechE Yorkshire Humber Processes Division, and today we're joined by Dr. Gary Wood. Dr. Gary Wood is a National Teaching Fellow. He is a lecturer within the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Sheffield, and he's also the head of the Sheffield Engineering Leadership Academy. So without further ado, I will hand you over to him.
Thank you, Jack, and hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today and to share some thoughts around what we might do to better prepare engineering graduates for their roles in industry, and to unpack some of the problems that I think we've been seeing over the last few years. So what I want to share with you today is really to highlight the skills gaps. I think we're all have some familiarity with those, but we'll look briefly at what evidence we have for those skills gaps and think a little bit about what we've tried to do about those skills gaps already. And then we'll think about why some of those things that we've been trying to do have not necessarily led to the positive impacts that we hope that they would. And still we're hearing reports of these mismatches between graduate skills and what colleagues in industry are seeking. Then I want to move us on to thinking a little bit further into the future, thinking about how the future of work is likely to change, and so how the demand for skills will change from where we are now. Because I think if we're going to attempt to tackle current skills gaps, we need to do that with an eye on the way that those skills gaps might evolve and change in the coming years as we move towards this vision of the future of work that we'll talk a bit about later in the session. Then I want to think about how we'll respond to this, or how we should respond to this, and make a series of suggestions and maybe even some provocations about what I think would be good ways for us to address some of these challenges. And then I'll wrap up with some calls to action that hopefully you might want to think about how you can respond to some of these challenges in your own particular roles. So skills gaps in engineering graduates have been reported for a long time. I've taken here an example from the IET, who does the annual Skills and Demand in Industry report. And just as one example, in 2014, 42% of companies reported that graduates lacked practical experience, and that what was really lacking in graduates was workplace and professional skills. That was being flagged as a particular problem. I could have gone back further than this. 2014 was just the year that I happened to choose as a point that was not too long ago, but so we can see some progress over time. But these reports go back further than 2014. We've been hearing about these gaps for a long time. And they're not just reported by IET. I could have chosen to take reports from, for example, the Royal Academy of Engineering and other bodies too, who are reporting these gaps. If we jump forward to the most recent IET Skills and Demand in Industry report, which was in 2019, then 59% of companies reported that graduates have the right academic knowledge but inadequate workplace skills. So you'll see a bit of a theme here, that there's a focus on workplace skills being inadequate. And somewhat gloomily, the figure gets worse. So we've gone from 42% in 2014 to now 59% of companies seeing this gap. But also, to make matters even worse, in 2019, we were also seeing reports of technical skills gaps, 57% in 2019, and that had risen from 46% in 2017. And just last year, the MPA reported in the Engineer says that UK engineering companies believe that the skills shortage is the issue that will have the most impact over the sector in the next 5 years. So there's some urgency here for us to really understand why are these skills gaps persisting? What is it that we're still not quite getting right that's leading to these skills gaps? And how might we be able to work collaboratively between industry and higher education in order to address some of these challenges? Briefly, what skills are we talking about here? This slide shares an extract from the IET 2014 report. And the important bars on the graph for you to look at are the ones that are the palest blue. So they're the ones that represent graduates. And you can see that at the top of the chart, practical experience, over 40% of companies saying here that graduates lacked practical experience, in the low 20s saying that graduates lack technical expertise, but also leadership capabilities, communication skills, ability to work on their own initiative, literacy and numeracy skills, team working skills. So a wide range of professional skills and technical expertise where we're seeing these gaps. And that's perhaps surprising, given that we've had an increasing focus on employability over the years in higher education. We've had changes in the way that we deliver our programs. We've had employability roles created. We've had changes in the pedagogy, the approaches that we're using to delivering our teaching and learning experiences. And as Kuhnen and Pratt say in this quote, so I'm going to go from about the middle of this, HEIs are no longer leaving it to graduates to discover how he or she might apply the knowledge gained from at the third level, but rather they're explicitly creating opportunities for students all the way through programs of study. And those opportunities allow the exploration of real-world applications and implications of their learning. So we have seen this. It's not necessarily been consistent across the sector. Some institutions do more of this than others. But the really kind of depressing message, I think, is that in spite of this, in spite of the best efforts that colleagues have been putting into this and trying to enhance student employability, these skill gaps are not going away. And indeed, we're not seeing much change in the specific skills that industry is telling us are lacking. So if we went back to that chart in the previous slide, sometimes we see between the reports that those skills change in their relative ordering and which ones seem to be the most in demand or the most lacking. But the top 10 skills don't really change very much across a period of time. So why might that be? Well, I want to offer these 6 ideas really for why I think some of these problems might be persisting and why we're not really cracking this yet. And I think, first of all, I question whether there's an issue here of perception versus reality, and whether that actually the skills gaps that we're hearing reports of are actually as severe as we might all believe. And I say that because one of the things I observe is that students can sometimes lack the capability to really be able to articulate their skills and capabilities effectively. And so if they've been working on projects where they have to work in a team, for example, might not readily draw out their team working skills as an example that they would put on a CV or talk about in an interview context. And to make that worse, there's also, I think, a language barrier here. Some of the terminology that is used across the higher education sector, so that students will be hearing in universities, is not quite aligned with the terminology that industry might use to describe the same skills and the same areas of capability. So as an example of that, we talk a lot in education about enterprise, where enterprise is an ability to understand the kind of context and to see opportunities within the context, and then to make things happen. And in industry terms, when I talk to industry partners and give that kind of description, often what they'll say to me is, oh, so you mean commercial awareness? And so actually, I think that perhaps part of the problem here is simply that we're not talking in the same language as each other in order to be able to articulate what the skills are that we really need, and then for students to understand that they have those skills, just maybe by a different name. There's also what I like to call the pub quiz effect. And so what I mean by this is that graduates leave universities with strong technical knowledge. And we know that because industry tells us that that's the case. In spite of the figures I just showed you from IET, often when we talk to industry, they will tell us that graduates by and large do have good technical knowledge. But because they haven't necessarily had opportunities to integrate that learning and to develop the intellectual capabilities around problem solving and being able to analyze problems and break them down, actually what happens is that they're equipped, hence my name pub quiz effect, they'd be equipped to pass a quiz about engineering, they'd be equipped to use their knowledge in that way in order to be able to share the facts that they know, but actually haven't had the opportunity to integrate that into a really productive working set of knowledge that allows them to apply that learning and to actually do engineering as opposed to knowing about it. That partly comes from my third point here, which is this concept of there being insufficient authenticity. I think that the learning experience, although we try to make it authentic within the context of a classroom environment in a university, it's not as reflective of the world of work as perhaps it could be. And I think what we need to do if we want to prepare students to be able to hit the ground running when they move out of their degree and into the world of work is to make sure that students are experiencing similar kinds of problems, working in similar kinds of ways whilst they're doing their degree as they'll be facing when they come out of the other side and move into industry. Fourthly, I think there are some challenges around developing leadership capability in our students. And what that means is that students don't really appreciate their agency with the knowledge that they have. They come out of universities from environments where they've been quite structured. They've often been given projects to work on or given structure to work within. And are not used to, from that experience, taking responsibility and using their knowledge to drive things forward. So when they come out into industry, too often perhaps wait to be given instruction, wait to be shown how to go about things, rather than taking control of that situation and recognizing that they have agency in making things happen and can put their knowledge and skills to productive use within the context of the organizations that they're working within. I think we see a need for students to learn more about continued professional development and develop the skills to be able to manage this. So as you transition out into industry and have more autonomy over the things that you're working on, that often will reveal to students and graduates that they need to develop their skills in new ways. They might need to go and upskill in certain areas or to read up on a particular topic again. And I think what we haven't been very good at historically is supporting students to build the skills to be able to do that. We give students choice in our degree programs, but that choice is very often constrained to a list of modules that they can select from, rather than saying to them, okay, what do you want to learn? What's going to add most value for you, given where you see yourself going in the future? And how might you go about doing that learning? What resources have you got available to you that can enable you to do that? And we need to equip students with that capability so that they can move forward positively within their careers and be ready to respond to the challenges that they face. And then finally, I think we need to challenge the concept of work readiness. I think we do need to prepare graduates to be ready to transition into the world of work. But it's a mistake to think that we can create graduates who are totally work ready for every role that they might possibly want to consider going into after they've graduated. There will always be a need for some transitional support and some industry training to help bridge that transition and to provide that support for students to come with the knowledge that they bring from their degree program and then to adapt and be able to apply that in a professional context. And so I think we need much more partnership working with industry in order to bridge that gap appropriately. So I think those are 6 problems. And so far, I'm conscious that what I've been saying to you might seem a bit gloomy. I'm sharing lots of problems and highlighting lots of challenges. But there's actually real reason to be optimistic here, because there's a commitment from both industry and education to finding solutions to these problems. So in the most recent IET skills and demand report, this graphic here is an extract from that report, and confirms to us that 81% of the industry respondents agreed that their businesses have a responsibility to support the transition from education and training into the workplace, and in order to get the people with the right skills that they're looking for. And that's matched by a commitment in education to developing new pedagogical approaches, to that focus on employability that we've seen, increased approaches in terms of things like active learning, so having students learn by doing rather than learning by sitting in a lecture theatre, for example, and increasing focus on supporting students to develop reflective skills to support them as independent learners. And so on both sides, in industry and in education, there is a real commitment here to finding solutions. I think the problem is that we just haven't yet aligned these things in such a way that we've seen the positive outcomes that we want to see. But I think that this gives us a really good starting point to move forwards positively and to start thinking about how could we do things differently, working in collaboration in order to really tackle these skills gaps. So before I offer you some suggestions for how I think we might do that, I think it's really important to be mindful of the fact that the kinds of workplace skills that graduates, indeed all of us, will need as we move forwards over the next few years are likely to change significantly. And as Jackson puts it in this quote from 2008, as educators, we're trying to tackle the wicked problem of preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist and that we can't even imagine, using technologies that haven't yet been invented to solve problems that we don't know are problems yet. We haven't even identified as problems or even locations of problems yet. And so the skills that we need to equip our students with will change in response to that. And we don't yet have a full picture of what those future skills will look like. What we do know is that those changes are being driven in large part by the concept of Industry 4.0, which is giving rise to increased digitalization, increased connectedness, and the kinds of changes that are reported and captured in the UK industrial strategy. And we know that it's really clear that new skills and approaches will be required to face those challenges. As we get more automation, we get more connectedness, we get more processes that are driven by machines rather than by humans. The skills that the humans involved in that process need will shift, and perhaps we'll see a different emphasis in where industry is requesting the skills in our graduates. So what might those skills look like? Well, obviously looking into the future, we can't be absolutely certain what these skills will look like. But Coonan and Pratt-Adams offer, on the basis of conversations with a number of stakeholders, offer the suggestions that you see here in this table. So apply knowledge in a complex environment. So they're thinking about things like problem solving, ability to argue from different points of view, ability to ask good questions, and that kind of systematic understanding of problems and context. Use and interpretation of data. So as we get more digitalization, data becomes much more important. So thinking about things like using data creatively, how to deal with data sets that might be incomplete, that give rise to some uncertainty, working with rich and ever increasing and expanding and much bigger data sets than perhaps we've ever encountered before. Social and interpersonal skills, so going beyond things like working in a team, but things like acting as a facilitator, managing a diverse range of stakeholders, dealing with emotional intelligence and being emotionally intelligent. And then flexibility, being able to adapt, be responsive to change, adapt to new environments, work in teams and independently in being able to do that. Innovative thinking, so this is about solving problems, being able to see the big picture, but then also appreciate the detail within that, and to be entrepreneurial and enterprising. And then finally, attributes and behaviors and values, where they're thinking about things like creativity, professionalism, resilience again, the ability to reflect, to take responsibility. So these are the sorts of skills that are being talked about in the context of the future of work. And actually a real emphasis, I think, in what's increasingly in the literature being called human skills. So perhaps less emphasis on the technical routine aspects of roles and more on the ability to make and build connections and to work with other people. And as Taylor puts it, the challenge then is to develop new skills that will not be targeted by automation. And so they argue that this is non-cognitive skills, such as relationship building, empathy, negotiation. So things that at the moment we don't see scope for automation to replace these roles. These are the kind of human aspects of being in a workplace. I think that what we'll see is, and we are seeing, is a shift of focus away from whole qualifications and towards individual skills and upskilling captured in the concept of micro-credentials. So not industry saying that actually we don't want somebody to go away and do an MSc program for a year or to do that part-time with some kind of maybe a few days a week going into a university over a long period of time. Because it's not about a whole qualification. It's about being able to respond quickly and in an agile way to get just the skills we need right now. And it doesn't have to be at the level of a whole qualification. It can just be the credentials in those skills that is what's required. And I think as we also look ahead, one of the things that we need to recognize and think about how we want to shape is this distinction between technical and academic skills. Because I think there's a perception of a dichotomy here that emerges from the UK industrial strategy and sees these things as separate, when in actual fact, I don't think they are. I think that actually there's no reason why you can't get really good technical skills through an academic experience and vice versa. So with the introduction of things like T-levels alongside A-levels, we get that separation between an academic route for people who are seen to be academically minded and want to go on that track, and then a more technical, more practical route for people who maybe are less academically focused and want that more hands-on experience. And actually, I think that that's a dangerous dichotomy for us to follow, and we actually need to be thinking more about how do we bring those things together rather than how do we separate them out, particularly when it comes to teaching in a university context. Nevertheless, we are seeing evidence that this dichotomy is being realized. So here's a quote from an industry survey respondent who said that we go to the Russell Group for our technology and research focused things and to find out about the kind of academic end of what we're working on. But increasingly to non-Russell Group universities for skills. So we are starting to see that separation of academic versus technical and practical. And we need to question whether that's right and whether that's what we want to happen. So what are the solutions? Well, I think my headline suggestion for a solution is that we really need to revisit the value of enterprise education. And enterprise education has been something that has existed in higher education and indeed in other levels of education for many years. But it's not reached the position of being a mainstream part of what we're offering within higher education. And by enterprise, what I mean is the set of capabilities that enables individuals to be able to spot opportunities, to then go and generate ideas and do something about them. So to be proactive, to be seizing opportunities, and to be the kind of person who is able to kind of seize those opportunities and make things happen, get things done. And there are various different models out there for how we can deliver enterprise education. One in particular that I'd like to work with for the purposes of today is from Barlowenga et al., who introduced 5 capabilities that for them define and make up an enterprising person. So the ability to solve authentic problems, to work with real, messy, wicked problems and be able to find solutions to those. Innovation and creativity. So thinking outside the box, being able to bring creativity, think innovatively, do things differently, challenge the status quo, and find new solutions through that process. Being able to take risks in a calculated way and having the skills and confidence to be able to do that. So not always being totally cautious, but being willing to push boundaries, try out new things, experiment, not be afraid of failure, but to fail fast and then to be able to learn from that and move on. Taking action, so having the leadership capability and that sense of agency that I talked about earlier, to be able to take action and make things happen. And then true collaboration, so really being able to build networks, to bring together the right people, to be able to draw on the input of other people, and to recognize the value that other people can bring to the table when you're working on a particular problem or challenge. So enterprise education, covering those 5 areas, prepares our students for the kind of uncertainty that they'll face in the future and to seize opportunities, because as I've said, we don't know exactly what the future will look like. But it will also prepare them well for what we're seeing currently in an industry context. So the ability to go and solve problems, the ability to bring innovation and creativity to that task, and so on. So this is not just about the longer term future or the medium term future, but about right now, enterprising graduates, our graduates who will be well equipped to succeed in the workplace. So how can we do this? What do higher education institutions need to do if we want to take this more enterprising approach? Well, first of all, I think we need to build more industry links. And we need to do that in ways that go beyond the traditional advisory board roles. It's no longer enough to have a meeting or even 2 or 3 meetings a year with an advisory board and think that that's going to help to make your curriculum industry linked and to help make sure that your graduates will be fit for purpose when they come out of the program and into industry. We really need to be engaging industry much more in delivering learning experiences directly to students, to help bridge that transition between being in higher education and being in the workplace. And also, as my second bullet point here says, to create authentic learning experiences that allow students to actually engage with real projects of the type that they will face when they move out into industry. Ideally, we want to make those interdisciplinary and the main focus of learning. So not bolted on enhancements where we say, oh, the students have an authentic project in a particular semester of their experience, or there's an experience week or something where students are working on these kinds of problems. But actually, we need to be moving towards that becoming the way that we deliver our education. In other words, having students learning in an environment and with problems of the type that they will be working on when they move out and put those skills and knowledge to work in a professional context. We need to recognize a shift in our traditional research-led disciplinary boundaries. So by this, I mean today, obviously, most of you are probably working in mechanical engineering. And I think we're recognizing a shift there and hearing from industry about a shift that means a mechanical engineer now needs to have some knowledge of electronics, needs to have knowledge of what's happening in the domain of automated control and systems engineering, needs to have some awareness of things that might traditionally have been taught within computer science in terms of coding and using those digital tools. And so we're seeing shifts and a kind of fuzziness appearing in the traditional disciplinary boundaries that at the moment are the structuring of our degree programs. And we need to start to think about that and how we can respond to that and make sure our degree programs stay current in terms of reflecting the actual knowledge sets and skill sets that graduates will need when they leave the university. We need to think about how we rebalance theoretical learning with professional skills. So recognizing that these workplace skills are just as important a part of being an engineer as being able to do the technical calculations work and having that theoretical knowledge. And we need to make sure that we're not relying on our students just developing those professional skills by some process of osmosis through just being in an environment where they need to use them. We need to have teaching and training as part of our programs that actually equip students with those skills and help them to build their capability in the same way that we would with the technical knowledge. We need to support the development of the application of the learning and skills, so help students to be able to apply and do things with their knowledge, not just to have a body of knowledge that, some set of facts that they know. We need to develop resilience and adaptability and a real capability for lifelong learning that underpins that resilience and adaptability. And I think one of the ways that we can do that is to support our students to start thinking about CPD well before they go out into industry and have to take responsibility for that for themselves. So I think creating opportunities where students can be reflective, can think about where are they going after they've graduated, where do they want to go, what kind of skills are they going to need in that context, and what are they doing about building those skills and making sure that they're shaping their profile in the right way for that role whilst they're still with us in the university. Part of that involves teaching reflective skills, and I think we've got better at this in recent years. We've got more focus on reflection and reflective practice, but I think there's still some way for us to go here in terms of equipping students with the skills to recognize stimuli for reflection. I think what we've ended up with is a situation where students can do reflective writing, but they equate that with an assessment. They equate that with writing an assessed piece of reflection because that's often what we're asking them to do. We're asking them to use a reflective toolkit to produce a reflective piece as some kind of assessment at some point during their degree program. And that means that they don't get to the point of coming to have reflective practice as a core part of their approach and seeing that actually they can do reflection as they go along and they should do reflection as they go along in order to improve their own practice. So really we need more support for students to be able to identify what are good opportunities to do reflection and when should they be using that tool to help them develop themselves. And then we need to help to establish this concept of future work skills through that close work with industry. So we don't have a clear picture of exactly what this will look like yet, but it will only emerge through us working closely together and starting to shape that and try out new ideas and get feedback from and work with our industry partners. But I don't think that this skills gap issue is a problem that can simply be solved by educators. I think that there's a responsibility for industry here too. And I think that what industry needs to do is to work closely with education. We saw earlier that 81% of companies in 2019 were saying that they saw a responsibility to work with educators in order to develop the talent pipelines that they aim to be able to draw on. But in the same report, it was reported that only 26% of companies are actually doing this right now. So there's real scope here for more companies to get much more involved in education and to help provide authentic learning experiences, to help shape learning so that it's aligned with industry needs. And actually in doing that goes beyond authentic experiences, in fact, and into real world experiences. Authentic experiences are what we can try to create within a classroom and university environment. But with the help of industry partners coming in and working closely with us, we can actually deliver real experiences and have students working on projects that will deliver real value to industry, and in so doing discover their own agency in ways that will be productive and useful to them as they move out into graduate life. And also by working with education, industry can help upskill and provide opportunities for our current staff, many of whom either haven't worked in industry because they've had a solely academic career, or at some considerable time since they were working in industry. And so in order to maintain that currency of understanding of what industry needs, we really need as educators to have that close partnership with industry so that we can learn from and with each other. Secondly, I think I'd like to see industry strengthening and expanding placement and work experience provision. And there's some positive news around this in that there's good numbers of students taking up year in industry opportunities across the UK now. And uptake of that chance to go and work in industry for a year as part of a degree programme is increasing quite sharply. We're seeing lots more students taking that opportunity up. But it's much harder alongside that for students to get shorter placements. So it's hard for students to get summer placements, for example, shorter placements that don't need to mean that they take a whole year out from their studies, but give them the opportunity to come and experience working in a professional environment during that summer downtime period when they're not working on their degree. And the IET again reports that less than 40% of companies offer work experience to university students. And I think one of the reasons for that in talking to our industry partners is that there tends to be a focus from our industry partners on what's the immediate value going to be to the business. And I hear often, we don't offer summer placements anymore because what we found is that it took a long time to induct students into the business. And if they're only going to be with us for a couple of months or maybe 3 months, then by the time they've really got up to speed with their role, it's time for them to leave again. And so there was this sense that the business isn't getting value from having those people there. It might actually have a negative value because of that time training them. That means resources diverted away from some other activity. But I think that misses an important point, which is that although there might be admittedly less value to a business in having a summer intern right now while the summer intern is with you, there's enormous value to students in helping them to discover the direction that they want to go in helping them to discover whether this is the right industry, whether they are a good fit for the kind of role that they've imagined themselves in. And it's amazingly powerful in firing students with enthusiasm. If they do discover that this is for them, when they come back, they've got a new commitment to achieving what they need to achieve to get into that position. They have a better understanding of the kinds of skills and qualities that they need to be focusing on developing. They can have a clearer appreciation of where there might be gaps in their CV that they can continue to work on. And so I really want to encourage a longer term view of value from the perspective of industry, of having these placement students come in and work with you. And yes, the value of a summer placement might not be immediately realized, but I'm confident that it will be realized in the longer term when it means that you can then recruit better graduates who've benefited immensely from having that summer experience and then being able to shape their learning through the rest of their degree to be a really good fit when it comes to them graduating at the end of their program. And I think also, importantly, there are these kinds of initiatives working on authentic problems, taking students off campus to industry sites. They obviously increase our cost base for the delivery of education. And so we need to look to industry to help support us with that. But these are not necessarily very expensive activities. It's amazing how far £1,000 can go, incredible what you can do with £5,000. So we're not talking about huge sums of money here. And I would encourage all our industry partners to think about what money are they already spending in working with higher education and what value is that delivering. Is it possible to invest that money in universities in ways that actually enhance and deliver more value and make that money work harder for you? So rather maybe than initiatives that just involve coming on campus to be visible and to have students come and talk to you, and then meeting lots of students, but only a subset of those students actually being the ones that you perhaps want to recruit, how could you use that funding to come on campus and actually work with us to be part of the educational experience, to be training your future employees by working with us in the curriculum, and at the same time meeting your future employees just as you might do if you went to a careers fair, and being able to help shape them and have an input and a stake in what those graduates look like. So I don't think this has to cost more money. It just might be about where we choose to spend that money and how that money is invested. And finally, what do students need to do? I'm conscious there might be some students on the call with us today. And the bad news for you students is that this is not just about what industry and educators are going to do to enable you to be effective graduates. There's a strong imperative here for you to actually take some responsibility too. And so I encourage you to be open-minded, to be willing to embrace challenges, to seek opportunities for interdisciplinary experience, so to look beyond the immediate focus of your degree discipline and think about what other disciplines around you in your engineering faculties could actually be complementary to the things that you're learning, and seek out opportunities to go and engage with those. Develop and be able to articulate your professional capabilities. So don't fall into the trap of just thinking that your employability is going to be about what you know technically, but think about how are you developing those wider transferable skills that will enable you to perform well in a workplace context. And really be able to articulate those. Make sure that you can talk about them. Make sure that when you're going along to interviews, you're able to explain those skills and talk about where you've got them in the examples that you give. And importantly, check with the job specifications when you're applying for opportunities, what kind of language are employers using to talk about the skills that you might have. And there might be a little bit of a translation exercise for you to do there between the terminology that you've been using in your degree and what you're seeing being used in industry. And that's where it comes to tailoring your CV and making sure that you're using the language that the employer is familiar with, so that you're really selling yourself in the best way possible. Practice reflection. Don't wait to be asked to do this as an assessment. Practice it regularly and learn to recognize where and how this can add value for you. So recognize what are the stimuli. It might be that you recognize that when you feel particularly stressed, for example, going and doing some reflection can add value for you. Be resourceful and commit to lifelong learning. Really think about developing your own professional development. So look ahead to the kinds of job descriptions that you might want to be applying for in a couple of years, depending on where you are in your degree. And think about how well prepared are you now? If you were going to apply for this job today, what would be the gaps for you in your knowledge and in your skills? And can you see within the rest of your degree program where you're going to be able to plug those gaps? It might be that you can look ahead and see that there are particular modules or learning units that you'll be doing in the future that will address that gap. But if you don't see those opportunities, then what else are you going to do? How else are you going to be able to plug those gaps? So be a bit more proactive in building your profile to suit what industry is looking for at the end of your degree. And that's really captured in my final bullet here about being self-aware, understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are, but then having that personal vision and the drive to make that personal vision for your own future a reality. So I briefly want to share with you some examples of how I think I've been doing some of these things in Sheffield with the Sheffield Engineering Leadership Academy. So SELA is a program that works in partnership with industry to develop a selected group of high potential engineering undergraduate students into future leaders that are fit for industry and really aligned with what industry tells us that they're looking for. And we do this through a program of skills workshops. We have guest speakers who come in and build the skills and knowledge of our students. Importantly, there's no lectures. This is all very practical, hands-on experience. Our students have experience in industry. They do go out and have summer placements or do year in industry placements to get that hands-on practical experience in industry. And they do integrative projects, so year-long real projects that have real deliverables, a real budget, real external stakeholders. And so it's really about it. There's no grades here. It's about delivering real value to external stakeholders. And importantly, working in an interdisciplinary context, because these students are drawn from right across our Faculty of Engineering and all the different engineering degree disciplines we have represented there. We link our students with real issues locally and nationally, so that they can start to really recognize the impact that they can make and recognize their agency, and move beyond that mindset of being just a student to being a professional engineer in training, and working towards going out there and doing this as their job in an industry context. And this model provides the space for students to practice their skills in these projects, to check their understanding, to discover what they've misunderstood and what they need some more support with, and importantly, to integrate these different skills with their technical knowledge. I'm not going to talk through all of these examples, but these are examples of the kinds of projects that our students have worked on, and we'll share these slides with you afterwards so that you can look at the detail. But just to pick out one example that I think is particularly relevant to today's audience is our project that's looked at Industry 4 adoption. And this is a project where our students have been looking at addressing the decline in manufacturing. They did it by creating an energy monitoring solution for an SME manufacturer, demonstrating the efficiencies that they could achieve with that, and then using that to start conversations with other SME manufacturers who were not using Internet of Things technologies and weren't really thinking about this concept of Industry 4.0 in any detail, and to start helping them to move forward on that journey. And across the other 3 projects that you see listed here, there are similar examples of impact and success from our students driving change and really being out there and working with professional people in order to learn from them, but also to teach them and to help them develop their knowledge and skills too. Partnership with industry in this process is absolutely crucial. Industry works with us at every stage, from mentoring our students to shaping the projects, introducing our students to their networks, and really creating that authentic environment for students to come out and learn in a professional environment. And students greatly value this experience. So here are some quotes that came from some of my students a couple of years ago, where they talked about things like their focus being shifted from grades to the output value, and recognizing that actually they didn't have to worry about what grade they'd get at the end of a project, because the most important thing was delivering good value and really being able to add some contribution to the organizations that they were working with, and that good grades would just follow that, because actually ultimately being a good engineer is not about grades anyway, it's about the value that you're able to deliver. And they talk about the fact that these projects connect learning to real applications, and so they can practice and recognize the value that they can bring. And we hear about this value from industry too. Students that come from many disciplines, said one of our partners, they bring new skill sets, they help us to innovate, they use new ways of thinking, and that's leading to change within the business. They're looking at new ways of doing things and looking at how to actually implement the changes that the students suggested and brought along to them. So I think when they're set up in the right way, and that requires this close involvement with industry and educators in designing these projects, actually everybody wins, and there's real value here, not just to the students. This doesn't have to be just an altruistic CSR policy response from industry. Actually, it can have real value to you too, not just in discovering your future talent pipeline, but also in terms of the work that students are able to do. So I want to end then with some calls to action. And invite you to take these and think about how you could respond to these in whichever of the 3 stakeholder groups you might sit. So with students, I want you to think, how can you seize opportunities to engage in extracurricular activities and in activity around your degree that helps to build your profile? And to do that, not just following your interests and things that you find to be fun, although it's obviously important to do that and follow your passions, but to think about, how is this developing me, and how is this helping to align my profile with where I want to be at the end of my degree program? Think ahead, do look at the job descriptions, and if you start to find that there are calls for skills that you don't think you're developing through your degree program, tell your institutions that. Go and talk to people who are involved in curriculum design within your departments, and seek out those opportunities to be involved in co-design. I'm a great believer in the curriculum being co-shaped and co-developed in partnership with students, and I encourage you to create those opportunities within your institution, so that you can help shape programs in the direction that you need them to be going, so that you develop the skills that you need. And finally, as I've said already, be reflective in everything that you do. Employers and industry partners, please think about how you can invest in building talent in order to be able to discover it. So how can you shift some of that focus from just spending money discovering students and discovering the talent that you want to recruit into actually reshaping that pipeline of funding to invest in building talent, and along the way then having those discoveries of the people that you want to recruit, and helping to upskill and shape the future workforce as you do that. Please work with us to shape authentic learning, and in doing that, to help us figure out what the future of work requirements are going to look like, and so to build in that agility within our programs that we can respond to that quickly as that future becomes clearer, and we need to start responding to that in terms of the delivery and education that we provide to our students. Think about transitions between higher education and employment. What can you do in terms of shorter placements that encourage students to be able to start that transition earlier before they get to the end of their degree program? And then what does that transition look like between finishing the degree and starting in industry? And how can we work together so that what training and support you're providing to students when they come out into industry really fully integrates and interfaces with what we've been providing in our degree programs, so that that transition is seamless, and it's about the kind of shaping and contextualization into your particular industry and your particular business, building on what students have learned in a more general sense through their degree program. And please, as you do this, continue to challenge us. It's really important as a higher education sector that we're delivering value to students and to their future employers. And so where that's not working and where you're still seeing gaps, continue to challenge us on that. But do that in constructive ways. Come and work with us to help solve those challenges. And then educators, go and seek out the people in your institution that can help you to bring enterprise into your curriculum. There's a real misconception around enterprise education that this is about preparing students to go and start businesses and to be entrepreneurs, and that's absolutely not the case. It can be one of the outcomes of being enterprising, that you go and want to start businesses, but equally it can really help our students because it means they're going to be engaging in authentic real-world problems and developing those skills, not just that we're seeing in demand right now, but some of those skills that we're seeing being called for in the longer term around collaboration and being able to have that vision and being able to have those human skills to work together with other people. Think about how you can move beyond disciplinary silos that might make sense to you in terms of the way that your university is structured, but actually are not necessarily delivering in line with what industry needs our graduates to have. So if you can't change your entire institution, and it's probably very difficult to go and say, we want to disrupt this and we want to start thinking of having different departments than we've currently got, what can you do as an individual educator to go out and find, if you're a mechanical engineer, the people in automated control engineering, the people in electronics, the people who are in computer science, and bring those people together to design new modules and new learning experiences that sit at the fuzzy interfaces that are emerging between those boundaries, and then to deliver those so that they have value not just for your students in mechanical engineering, but for the other students who are in the departments that you're working with too. And finally, remember that particularly if you're in a research-intensive university, that our role as educators is not just, or even mainly, to train the next generation of researchers. Of course, we hope some of our shining stars will go on to be researchers and to work in academia, but we have to face the reality that the vast majority of our students want to go into industry, and so we have a duty to make sure that we're preparing them well for that. So some calls to action for all our stakeholder groups there. I'm going to stop talking now and invite Jack to share with me some of the questions that you'll have been asking in the chat so that I can answer those for you. And of course, this webinar is just the start of our journey exploring these skills gaps, exploring our response to them. And we've got a program of webinars coming up through the summer where you'll actually get to hear from these different stakeholder groups. So the webinars will be led by students, one will be led by employers, one will be led by educators. And that's really the opportunity for us to drill into these ideas in a lot more detail and to get to the point of asking lots more questions. So I'll share these slides with you afterwards, so you've got the references there, and my contact details and a copy of the slides will be available on my website there on this final slide. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that, Gary. We sure have had a lot of questions following on from that. I don't think we'll have time to get through all of them, but we'll do our best. So the first question, it's quite a long one, but very relevant, I think, is to what extent might the deficit in job readiness be a myth? They then go on to say that nobody is able to hit their full stride from day one in a new job, but employers will always wish that they could. This may be reflected in the fact that they report a deficit in job readiness, not least because whether it exists or not, it's in the employer's interest to always be expecting more from education and training providers. As you say, graduates can never be fully prepared for every role they might move into.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point. I think that, and this is why I'm encouraging this close collaboration, and for us to think about this as a pipeline rather than a kind of, at the moment, I think there's a fairly abrupt transition point between finishing a degree and then moving out into industry. And it's, students stop being in a university education environment and then move out into a professional environment where the approach to learning is different, where there is training provided, and the expectations on them are very different in terms of their ability to take initiative and to run with ideas themselves. And what we need to do is to work closely together to bridge that transition and make it more seamless. And I think that that's one of the ways that we can get around this idea that expectations of industry will always be higher than what we're aiming to provide, because of course you want us to provide as much as possible. But I think we have to see this as an approach to working in partnership, so that we get the graduates to the point that it is appropriate for you then to pick up with the training that you're providing internally, so that very quickly, within the time that the graduate has joined industry, they are ready to take on all of the challenges that they face, because they've experienced that smooth transition and are not grappling with trying to address these skills gaps just by themselves.
Brilliant. Okay, another question from a graduate. The question is, as a graduate from 2020 who joined a small startup company, what's the best way to identify personal development opportunities and begin conversations about potential opportunities internally?
So I think that this is a really good question, and this comes back to the idea of CPD that I talked about earlier. So I would like to see much more of a focus on equipping students with this skill to be able to look ahead in their degree. And I think what that looks like is an awareness of where you want to go after you've graduated, and then to look at, excuse me, to look at the job descriptions for the kinds of roles that you want to go into, and then to start thinking, how well prepared am I for this? So a good exercise for you to do is to look at the job description and imagine you were writing your application now. And could you cover everything that it's asking for? Could you give examples of everything? And if you can, then ask yourself the question, okay, so which are the things that I'm saying on my application that I'm crossing my fingers and praying nobody's going to ask me about when I get to the interview, because they're the weakest parts of my application and I have the thinnest evidence for. And so I don't really want to have to talk about those in any more detail, because if I do, I probably won't get the job. And everybody will have those things, right? You, in any role you go into, there will be things that are development opportunities for you. But I don't think you have to stop doing that exercise just because you're already in a graduate role, right? If you're ambitious in your career and you're thinking about where are you going next, look ahead. Look at what are the people who are just a bit more senior than you doing? What kind of work are they doing? What kind of skills are they using right now? What do their job descriptions look like? And how do their job descriptions differ from yours? And through that, you'll start to identify what are the things that I need to be able to evidence in order to be able to secure that next level role. And once you've done that, you'll have an idea of what the skills are that you need. And then it's a question of how do you get those skills? And of course, you might be lucky. You might be in an organization that has some funding available to you that you could go out and do a course. You might find an online course that you could do fairly inexpensively. You might have a line manager who's willing to support you with that. And it's always a good idea to talk to your line manager about these development needs that you've identified. And a good line manager will have a positive conversation with you about that and will want to support you in particularly where those goals that you have in terms of your development align with the business needs of the organization. They will want to support you with that. And then be mindful, of course, that there's lots of things you can do out there that don't have to cost money. So if you do find that there isn't a pot of money to pay the £500 for you to go and do the course that you've seen, what else can you do instead? And there are lots of online courses that you can do for free. You can look at things like the programs of webinars that the Institution of Mechanical Engineers and other professional bodies offer, and use those to help you. And also, don't be afraid to go and ask other people. If there are people who are a bit more senior than you in the organization working on things that involve skills that you want to learn, go and ask if you can help them. Don't wait to be told what kind of opportunities you should take. It's really powerful. Asking people if you can help them is a really powerful way of developing yourself, because people don't often refuse help. and it will allow you to get into positions and into opportunities and into projects that otherwise you might not have been involved in. And through that, you'll be able to demonstrate your skills as you move forward to apply for new opportunities.
Great, thank you very much. Questions are really flooding in. So the next one is I'm going to ask is more seller focused. So it's how many students take part in seller projects, and how do you manage student numbers and expectations?
Okay, so our intake each year is 40 students. So that's very selective because we're selecting that 40 from a pool of about 1,200 undergraduate engineers that we have coming into our first year of engineering every year. And because it's a 2-year program, that means that at any given point in time, we've got 80 students in the program working on these kinds of projects. Not all working together, but in smaller sub-teams. So that's how we've got a number of different projects running in parallel. And we select them through a competitive process. The students apply to join the program. We've deliberately made sure our process seeks potential rather than previous achievements. So one of the ways that we do that, for example, is that when we have students writing applications, we don't allow them to talk about any achievements that they've had before they came into the university. So we really try to level the playing field when they're applying. And in that way, we can start to see how proactive have students been in the first semester that they've been in the university, what they engaged with, how are they already maybe demonstrating that kind of spark of leadership capability that we then want to capture and nurture within the program. Sorry, Jack, was there a second part of the question that I've forgotten?
Apologies, I'm muting myself there. No, I think you covered all the basis of that question. Right, so another question from a fresher student, which is due to a lack of experience, we freshers don't really get much professional experience for leadership. And how can they overcome that at an early stage in their university experience?
Again, this is a good question. I think you might find, depending on where you're studying, that there are formal ways that you can do that. So like the seller program in Sheffield, for example, that you could look out for and see whether there are opportunities like that that are structured. But otherwise, I think it's about being able to demonstrate that you've been able to take the lead, right? And so going and getting engaged with any student society. So you might have a Formula Students team within your university, for example. Go and get involved with that and demonstrate that you've been able to drive forward a project, that you've been able to go out and work with other people, bring other people on board, secure the resources that you need. So it's not necessarily all about formal training, but about how you're demonstrating these capabilities through the experiences that you're having. And of course, I've argued in my presentation that I don't think you can entirely develop these skills just through experience. You need opportunities to reflect, and you need some input that will help you to know how best to work in a team, for example. If you try and learn to work in a team just by working in a team, well, you're very likely to have a very frustrating experience and actually learn that you don't like working in a team. But what you really need is that positive input in terms of helping you to be able to shape your learning. And so if you can seek out those opportunities to be involved in student societies that give you a platform to be able to start taking the lead, then I would encourage you to go and look for how can you get a mentor who can help you with this. And that doesn't have to be a member of staff. It could be a student who's in the society who's further ahead than you are and has already experienced the kinds of challenges that you might be experiencing. What can you learn from them? Can you talk to your personal tutor about their experience of using these kinds of skills? Do you have somebody in your department that's responsible for this kind of professional skills education that you can go and talk to? Increasingly, career services within universities run mentoring programs with industry mentors where you can sign up to get a mentor in industry. So I think it's about piecing together all of these things. One aspect is giving yourself the experience to practice these skills. And then the other is what kind of input am I getting to help me know what kind of skills to apply and to reflect on those skills. And finding good mentors is a really effective way of being able to do that.
Great, thank you. And another question from a PhD student this time is industry roles in larger organizations may still require highly specialist knowledge, perhaps from postgraduates rather than graduates. And how can this be best balanced with the interdisciplinary and fuzzy capabilities that you mentioned?
Well, I think this comes from really, so you're right, obviously, that when you do, if you're moving into PhD level study, then by its nature, the focus of that is that you become more specialized in a particular area. And of course, there will always be roles that require that specialization. So I'm not suggesting that we all go towards being generalists, right? We need specialists too. But I think what's important for you as you do your PhD is to understand the context in which your PhD specialist research fits. So where are the interfaces between that specialism that you're developing and things that might be specialisms within other engineering disciplines? And I'm not suggesting that you have to go, if you're a mechanical engineer, and almost do a degree in electronics engineering as well to make yourself employable. But at the very least, what you want to understand is how does what happens in electronics engineering or automated control engineering or computer science or any other engineering discipline, how can that have value in a mechanical engineering context? So that at the very least, you'll know when to go and talk to somebody who is an expert in those disciplines to bring in their expertise to the table when you're having a conversation about a problem or a challenge that you're trying to solve. So you want a minimum level of that kind of awareness. And if you've got some even rudimentary skill in that area yourself, to be able to know what kinds of questions to ask, then that's powerful too.
Great, thank you. And I think due to the time limit, I'm going to have to make this our last question, but it sure is a good one. If we are to get real experiences into the curriculum, how do we overcome the barriers such as the lack of agility in curriculum change, or creating new projects amid industry concerns about the lack of quality or value coming out of these student projects?
Okay, so the first thing to say, if you haven't had your question answered, Jack said this was the last one. We will keep all of those questions and we'll either respond to them in the future webinars, or we'll find a way to share some answers to those afterwards. So please don't leave feeling disappointed if you didn't get an answer today. We will answer that. I think this is a good question about how, the challenges of being in an institution and with an institutional structure that is established for a more traditional kind of education than perhaps I am advocating here. I think there are ways that you can do this. And I think that the important thing is when you start thinking about curriculum change or designing a module that's innovative in the way that it's delivered, think early about who the stakeholders are that you need to involve in that process. So in my experience of doing curriculum change work in our own Department of Mechanical Engineering here in Sheffield, what we've always had a really diverse group of people around the table while we've been doing that. So we've brought people from our quality assurance teams in to sit around the table right at the very beginning when we've been thinking about where we might go. We've had people from our enterprise team come and sit around the table to help us think about, what direction are we going in. We've had students at the table. We've had industry partners at the table. So a really diverse group of people. But I think it's important to have all of those stakeholders so that everybody understands the rationale and the impetus for change that you've got. And my experience is if you've got those people who work in quality assurance, who are often the people who say, the system doesn't allow you to do this particular thing that you want to do, those pushbacks often happen later on. If you come and say, here's my module and I want to do it in this way and it doesn't quite fit with the university systems, that's a problem if you're raising that at the point that you're asking for it to be approved. There's often a bit more flexibility and a willingness to find flexibility if the people who are involved in that process of needing to do that negotiation actually understand the rationale and they've been part of the process and they can see the exciting change that you're trying to make. They're often not deliberately trying to be barriers, right? They're trying to uphold standards, and as long as they can see that that's happening, then I think you can often negotiate ways around that. And I think it comes back as well to you being enterprising as educators and finding ways to be creative in the way that you might work with the modular structures that you have to work with within your university, but create different methods of assessment. Does your assessment have to sit within the individual module, for example? Or could you move your assessment out and have a module that is a shell in which all the assessment sits to free up space in other modules? There's lots of creative things that you can do. But again, working with the people who run those systems will really help. And I think, you have to be a champion for change. You have to not let these things get in your way, because actually, there's a sense here that we start letting the tail wag the dog, right? And we can't let the systems determine what kind of education we want to provide, or we're increasingly going to fall into the trap of providing education that is not fit for purpose, particularly as we're changing and seeing these future skills coming online. So we just have to drive and not be deterred when we start to hit these barriers, but just see them as obstacles to overcome rather than as total roadblocks.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Gary, for your time today. And also thanks to everybody for the questions that they've submitted. We really have had a lot of questions, and I'm really sorry that we weren't able to get through all of them today. But as Gary said, we will keep your questions and address them as best as we can. Please look out for advertisements for the second webinar in this series, which is happening on the 14th of June at the same time, 11:30 a.m. BST. So I think that's all there is to say. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks.